Hello, my name is Alita, and I'm 27 years old. I'm someone who values stability and believes that a healthy relationship is built on a foundation of trust, respect, and love. Over the years, I've had the opportunity to experience meaningful relationships, and I always seek a deep connection with those around me. I appreciate people who are patient, grounded, and able to face challenges without letting emotions take over. I'm not someone who gets easily swept up in novelty or chaotic relationships. Instead, I look for peace and balance in life. Today, I want to share a story about my relationship, one that started with stability and trust, but eventually led me to question its compatibility and what I truly need in life. I had been dating Alex for nearly 2 years, and during that time, our relationship had been solid. We had our ups and downs, like any couple, but there was a deep sense of comfort in being together. His family was welcoming, and they made me feel like I was already a part of their world. I felt happy and secure. It wasn't the kind of passion that you see in movies, but it was real. We were partners in every sense of the word, and I had no complaints. In fact, I didn't question much about our relationship. To me, it was simple. We loved each other. He was steady, reliable, and so easy to be around. I had always been drawn to Alex's calm demeanor. He wasn't the type of person to create drama or stir things up. He had a quiet strength about him, and that was exactly what I needed. His sense of stability was something I valued deeply, especially given how unpredictable life could be. At first, I was relieved that we didn't need constant excitement or new thrills to sustain our connection. I was content with the way things were, and truthfully, I believed that love could be built on trust, mutual respect, and understanding. That's exactly what we had, and I believed we could continue to grow together in that safe, predictable space. Still, there were moments when I felt a nagging sense that something was missing. It wasn't a constant feeling, but there were brief flashes where I wondered if this relationship was as exciting as it should be. I'd catch myself thinking that maybe things had become too comfortable. The spark that once ignited our early days together seemed to be flickering, not out of a lack of love, but more out of a sense of routine. The familiarity we shared was comforting, but occasionally I couldn't help but feel that we were coasting, that maybe the excitement I had once felt in the early stages of our relationship had faded, and I wasn't sure why. I told myself it was just normal. Relationships evolve, and a certain level of stability was to be expected. I figured it was natural for things to calm down after the initial whirlwind of excitement and newness. As time passed, I pushed these thoughts aside, convincing myself that any relationship would face this stage. We still had love, trust, and companionship, and that was what mattered. I didn't want to make mountains out of molehills, especially when things were already so comfortable. If we were happy, why should I question it? I didn't want to admit it, but in the back of my mind, I couldn't help but wonder, was there something more out there that we weren't experiencing? Was this it? I would occasionally talk to my friends about it, but they would reassure me that all relationships had their lulls and that what Alex and I had was far better than the chaotic relationships some of them were dealing with. They'd tell me to stop worrying, that I was lucky to have a steady, reliable partner like Alex. For a while, I let those thoughts slip away, letting the feeling of routine guide me. I thought to myself that things would get better with time, that maybe this was just a phase. But then, one event changed everything. Something happened that made me stop and really think about the state of our relationship, a moment that shook me and forced me to reevaluate everything I had believed to be true. It started with a comment Alex made one evening, something so small that I brushed it off initially. We had been sitting on the couch after dinner, talking about our day when he casually mentioned that he didn't think I was as adventurous as I used to be. The word stung a little, but I laughed it off, brushing it aside as just a passing remark. Alex wasn't the kind of person to make cutting comments, so I didn't dwell on it. But later, when I replayed the conversation in my mind, something about it felt off. Why did he bring that up? Was it a hint that he was starting to feel bored with the relationship too? The more I thought about it, the more I realized that I had, in fact, become more predictable. I wasn't as spontaneous as I once was. Maybe he was right. I had stopped seeking out new adventures and we had settled into a comfortable rhythm. It wasn't bad, but I started to wonder, was this the relationship I wanted for the long term? Had we reached a plateau? But even with those doubts creeping in, I didn't think there was any real danger. Sure, we weren't as excited as we once were, but I was confident in our bond. We had a strong foundation, and that was something to be proud of. After all, stability and comfort were key ingredients to a lasting relationship, right? We could work through this, I told myself. It was just a temporary phase. I tried to put the thoughts out of my mind, but they lingered, quietly eating away at the edges of my confidence in us. Was it normal to feel like something was missing, even though everything was technically fine? Could it be that I was just overthinking it? Was I being unreasonable, expecting more than what we had? As the days went by, these thoughts kept coming back, nudging at me when I least expected it. I started to question myself. Maybe I wasn't content after all. Maybe I was longing for something more, something beyond what I already had. I didn't know how to confront these feelings, or even if I should. Maybe I was just getting caught up in a fleeting moment of doubt. Little did I know, these feelings were only the beginning of a much bigger revelation that would force me to confront the truth about my relationship with Alex. One evening, as we were sitting on the couch after dinner, chatting about the usual day-to-day things, I overheard Alex say something that stopped me in my tracks. He didn't know I was listening, and the words came out casually, but they hit me like a ton of bricks. He said, "Honestly, sometimes I feel like you're not that interesting anymore." I couldn't believe it. My mind went blank, and my heart sank into my stomach. It wasn't just the words themselves, but the tone, like it was a passing thought, something unimportant. But to me, it felt like the ground was shifting beneath my feet. The shock was so immediate, so deep, that I struggled to hold myself together. I had to force myself to keep breathing, to maintain the appearance of calm. But inside, I was a mess. I couldn't understand why he would say something like that. Alex had always been kind and understanding. Sure, we had our fair share of arguments, but nothing ever felt like this. It wasn't the kind of comment I would expect from him, especially not after everything we'd been through together. I thought we were solid, that we had built something real. But now, it felt like the foundation was cracking. I tried to stay composed as I turned to him, asking as casually as I could, "What do you mean by that?" The words barely came out, and I hoped that I wasn't sounding as panicked as I felt inside. He looked at me, seemingly unaware of the weight his words had just carried. "Oh, I don't know. It's just that sometimes I feel like we've gotten into a routine. We don't do anything spontaneous anymore. It's not like when we first started dating." He said it like it was nothing, a passing observation. But for me, it was a crushing blow. I sat there, feeling like I was being suffocated by the confusion and hurt that filled me. I couldn't understand. Why did he think that? Why did he feel this way about me? I had always thought that relationships were about trust, love, and stability, and I had tried to give him exactly that. Was it not enough? Did I somehow fail to keep things interesting for him? Was I boring him? At that moment, I was torn between wanting to get up and walk away and wanting to stay and dig deeper into what he had said. I knew I had to confront this. I couldn't let it go. But at the same time, I didn't want to seem desperate, like I was seeking validation from him. So I stayed. I tried to keep my voice steady. "Are you saying I'm not interesting anymore?" I asked, the question coming out quieter than I intended. Alex looked at me with a mix of confusion and concern. No, that's not what I meant. It's just that everything has kind of settled into a routine. We're not doing the things we used to do. I miss the excitement, the spontaneity." His words made my stomach churn. Was that what he was really upset about? The excitement? The adventure? I tried to listen, to understand, but I felt a pit growing in my chest. I had always prided myself on being supportive, on providing him with stability and a loving home. But was that really what he wanted? Was stability enough, or did he need something more? Something I couldn't give him? I thought back to our earlier days together, the nights filled with long talks, the spontaneous weekend getaways, the excitement of learning about each other's lives. Was he longing for that again? And if so, what has changed? Had I changed? Or had he? I started to spiral, the questions piling up in my mind. What if I had somehow become too predictable? What if, in my attempt to build a life with him, I had become boring? Was I so focused on creating something stable and reliable that I had forgotten about keeping the spark alive? The hurt began to fade into something else, a quiet panic that I wasn't enough for him. I had always believed that love, trust, and support were enough to carry a relationship, but maybe that wasn't true. Maybe I had overlooked the things that truly kept a relationship vibrant. Was I too focused on maintaining the steady course of our lives that I had neglected the very thing that brought us together in the first place? The excitement, the passion? As these thoughts swirled in my head, I could feel a sense of loss creeping in. I was questioning everything. I thought back to the days before the proposal, before everything felt like it was falling into place. Did I feel this way then? Had I noticed something in myself that was missing, that needed to be revived? Or had I been so focused on giving Alex what he needed that I had forgotten to care for myself? I wanted to ask him more questions, to get to the heart of what was going on in his mind, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Part of me wanted to confront him further, to demand more answers, but another part of me felt so vulnerable. If I pushed too hard, what would happen? Would he resent me for questioning him? Would he pull away even more? At that moment, I realized I was standing at a crossroads. I needed to decide whether I would fight for this relationship for us or if I would just let it go. I didn't know if I was ready for either option, but I knew one thing for sure. This conversation had changed everything. The words Alex had casually thrown out had planted a seed of doubt in my mind, and I couldn't ignore it. The path ahead was unclear, but it was a path I had to face, whether I was ready or not. I excused myself and went to bed early that night, my mind racing. I lay there staring at the ceiling, the reality of the situation settling over me. What did I want? What did I need from this relationship? And more importantly, what did Alex want? Could we move past this? Or had something irreparable shifted in the way we viewed each other? I didn't have the answers yet, but I knew this conversation was just the beginning. The truth had been uncovered, and now I had to figure out what it meant for the future of our relationship. When I confronted him about what I overheard, I wasn't expecting his response. He didn't give me a clear answer. Instead, he started avoiding the question. He said that he never thought I wasn't excited, but the truth was, his words still stung. It felt like a bucket of cold water was thrown over me, and I couldn't process it. I understood that maybe he was trying to downplay it, but how could he say something like that to me without thinking about how it would affect me? His nonchalant response made me feel dismissed and unimportant. I tried to stay calm, but I couldn't help the way I felt. I kept asking myself why we were even at this point. We've been together for so long, and I always thought we were on the same page. Why couldn't he just tell me the truth from the start, instead of letting me find out the way I did? I felt like I was being left out in the dark, and it made no sense to me. It was as though we weren't communicating at all anymore, and I wasn't sure how we got here. His inability to open up and just tell me how he felt left me confused and hurt. At that moment, I realized I wasn't just upset by the comment itself, but by the lack of transparency in our relationship. Why couldn't he just be honest with me? Why had I not been a priority in his life? I felt like I was stuck in a relationship where I wasn't really being seen for who I was, and that was devastating. As much as I wanted to brush it off, the feelings of being neglected and ignored kept creeping in, and I couldn't shake them. Our discussions started to feel more like arguments. I would ask him about it, and he'd either deflect or say things that didn't really answer my questions. He kept saying he didn't mean it, but the damage was done. I couldn't just forget what he'd said, and the more we talked, the more it felt like we were spiraling into a cycle of misunderstandings. We both tried to move past it, but it seemed like the issue wasn't going away. The hurt was still there, and I didn't know how to make it stop. I tried to reason with him, but every time I asked about his feelings or what he truly thought, he either avoided the conversation or gave vague responses. It started to feel like he wasn't even interested in fixing things. I wanted answers, but it felt like he didn't want to give them to me. The more I tried to engage, the more distant he became, and I felt more and more alone in this relationship. I wasn't sure where we stood anymore, or if he even cared enough to work through this. As the days went by, the relationship that had once felt so stable and secure seemed to slowly slip away. It wasn't a dramatic change, but a gradual one. A shift that I didn't fully notice until it had already started to affect the way we interacted. I had always prided myself on being a good listener, a supportive partner who understood when things were tough, and I thought that would be enough. But now, I was beginning to realize that it wasn't. The first signs came when Alex started talking more about a woman named Rachel. She had been a colleague of his for a while, someone he often mentioned in passing. I didn't think much of it at first, dismissing it as just a colleague. But over time, her presence in our conversation seemed to grow, and Alex began to share more details about her, how they'd had long talks about work, how they'd spent time together outside of work, how they seemed to understand each other in a way he said he hadn't felt with anyone else. He made it sound harmless, like they were just friends, but there was something about the way he spoke that left me feeling uneasy. At first, I tried to brush it off. I told myself it was just his way of talking about someone he trusted. He'd always been close with his colleagues, and maybe this was just another friendship. But as the weeks passed, I started to feel an underlying tension in the way he spoke about Rachel. It wasn't just casual anymore. It was as if he was seeking validation from me by sharing these details, expecting me to be okay with it. And yet, I wasn't. The more he talked about her, the more I felt an uncomfortable distance between us. It was as if he was opening up to someone else in a way he hadn't done with me. I couldn't deny the feeling that something was missing in our relationship, and it seemed like he was filling that gap with Rachel. His attentiveness towards me had waned. It wasn't just about the small gestures, the thoughtful words, the surprise texts, the hugs, but it was also about his presence. He wasn't there emotionally in the way he had been before. He seemed distracted, lost in his own thoughts, and increasingly absorbed in his connection with Rachel. I tried to talk to him about it, but every time I brought it up, he dismissed my concerns. He would assure me that I was overthinking it, that Rachel was just a friend, and that there was nothing more to it. But deep down, I felt ignored. He had always been open with me before, sharing his thoughts and feelings, but now I felt like I was left in the dark. The more he talked about her, the more I felt like a stranger in my own relationship. It wasn't about Rachel specifically, but about the fact that Alex was pulling away from me, emotionally distancing himself in a way I didn't understand. The conversations we used to have, the ones that were meaningful and full of connection, started to fade. We weren't communicating like we used to, and I began to notice the small but significant changes in how we interacted. He no longer asked me about my day, my thoughts, or how I was feeling. Instead, he seemed more focused on Rachel and her opinions, sharing her thoughts as though they held more weight than mine. I began to wonder, was I really the person he wanted to be with? Was I just another presence in his life? Or was I still the person he loved, the one he was building a future with? The thought of not being seen, not being heard, gnawed at me. I was giving him everything, my time, my love, my care, but it seemed like I was no longer his priority. It wasn't just about Rachel anymore. It was about the fact that he was no longer putting in the effort to maintain the closeness we once had. I began to realize that I wasn't just missing something in our relationship. I was missing him. The emotional distance between us became undeniable. I could no longer ignore the reality that we weren't the same. The spark we once had seemed dimmer, and I was starting to feel like I was chasing something that no longer existed. We were no longer on the same wavelength. Our conversations felt forced, and I found myself questioning whether we truly understood each other anymore. We had been in sync before, but now, it felt like we were two people who had grown apart without even realizing it. I started to ask myself the hard questions. Was this the relationship I wanted? Had we outgrown each other? Were we truly compatible? Or was I holding on to something that had already changed? As much as I didn't want to admit it, I started to see the truth. We were no longer the people we had been when we first fell in love. We had drifted in different directions, and the connection we once shared had weakened in ways I couldn't ignore. The realization hit me hard. I wasn't just questioning my relationship with Alex because of Rachel. I was questioning the very foundation of our bond. I had tried so hard to hold everything together, to maintain the stability we had, but now I was seeing that stability might have been all we had. And stability alone wasn't enough to keep a relationship alive. It wasn't just about missing the excitement, the passion. It was about feeling disconnected from the person I thought I knew so well. I had given so much of myself to him, and yet I was left feeling invisible. It wasn't that I needed constant excitement, but I needed to feel seen, heard, and valued. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't. As the days passed, I started to make sense of what had been happening. I couldn't ignore the signs anymore. We were no longer in sync. We had outgrown each other in different ways, and I couldn't continue pretending everything was fine. The truth was staring me in the face. We weren't meant to be together anymore. I had tried to ignore the cracks, but they were too big to ignore now. And just like that, I realized that it wasn't about Rachel or anything specific. It was about us. We had become two different people, and I couldn't keep holding on to something that wasn't there anymore. The connection, the closeness, the love we once had, it was fading, and it was time to let go. After all the tense conversations, I reached a breaking point. I couldn't keep ignoring my feelings or pushing them down anymore. I had to know the truth. Was he still in love with me? Did he even want to continue our relationship? I couldn't stand the uncertainty any longer, so I confronted him. I needed to hear it from him. Was this relationship even worth fighting for? The answer he gave me was a punch to the gut. He told me that he no longer felt the same spark between us, that everything had become monotonous, and he had even considered ending things. My world felt like it was crashing down around me. All the questions, all the doubts I had been harboring were suddenly answered in the worst possible way. It was as though I had lost my place in his life, and I was no longer the priority I once thought I was. The realization that he had been thinking about leaving me was crushing. I tried to hold myself together, but the pain was unbearable. His words hit me like a wave, and I couldn't breathe. All this time, I had been trying so hard to make things work, to ignore the subtle cracks in our relationship, and now it felt like all that effort had been for nothing. The person I had loved and trusted had emotionally distanced himself from me, and it hurt more than I could express. The fact that he had considered leaving felt like a betrayal in itself. Yet, in the midst of the hurt, I also understood something painful. If we continued like this, if we kept dragging out this stagnant relationship, it would only harm both of us. I could see that we had stopped growing together, and staying together out of habit or fear would only lead to more pain and frustration. I knew that if we didn't confront the issues between us, it would only make things worse in the long run. It was a hard realization to come to. I didn't want to lose him, and I certainly didn't want to accept that our relationship was no longer what it used to be. But deep down, I knew that we couldn't keep pretending. It would be better for both of us to face the truth, even if it meant letting go. I was devastated, but at the same time, I felt a sense of clarity. As painful as it was to hear him admit he no longer felt the same, it gave me the space to think clearly. I knew I deserved more than this. More than being in a relationship where both of us were no longer invested. It wasn't fair to either of us, and it certainly wasn't healthy. I had to make a decision. Did I want to continue holding on to a relationship that was slowly fading? Or did I have the strength to walk away and open up the possibility for something better? The thought of losing him hurt, but I knew I couldn't stay in something that wasn't fulfilling either of us. I needed to move forward, even if it meant stepping into the unknown. It took me a long time to finally come to terms with the decision I had been avoiding. For months, I had been clinging to the hope that things would get better, that the love we once shared would somehow rekindle itself. But the truth was becoming impossible to ignore. The relationship had changed in ways I couldn't reverse. Despite all the love I had poured into it, despite all my efforts to make it work, I was the only one who seemed to care anymore. Alex had stopped being the person I had fallen in love with. He was distant, detached, and seemed more interested in his connection with Rachel than in working through the issues we were facing. It wasn't just about her. It was about the way he had stopped making an effort with me, the way he had stopped seeing me as his priority. I had tried to talk to him, tried to express how I was feeling, but it always seemed to fall on deaf ears. It became clear that he wasn't willing to put in the effort to fix what was broken. The emotional distance I had been feeling for so long became too much to bear. I couldn't keep pouring myself into a relationship where I wasn't getting anything in return. I started to feel like I was invisible, like I was just going through the motions while he went on with his life, more focused on other things and people than on me. I realized that I had been trying to hold on to something that was no longer there, something that had faded over time and that I had been too afraid to let go of. But now, I could see it clearly. We were two different people, living in two different worlds, and no amount of effort on my part could fix that. The final straw came when I realized that I was no longer being heard or valued. I was tired of being the only one who cared, the only one who tried to keep things together. I had spent so much time trying to salvage something that wasn't working, but the truth was, we had outgrown each other. We had reached a point where the relationship had become a source of pain rather than joy. The spark, the connection, had all but vanished. What was left was just a shell of what we once had, and I couldn't keep pretending it was enough. I needed to let go. I needed to find myself again, to rediscover who I was without constantly trying to hold on to someone who no longer saw me the way I deserved to be seen. It was time to make the hardest decision of my life, to walk away from Alex. The thought of ending things terrified me, but at the same time, it brought a strange sense of relief. I realized that I had been holding on for so long because I was afraid of what would happen if I let go, but I had come to understand that the fear of being alone was nothing compared to the fear of losing myself in a relationship that no longer fulfilled me. The decision wasn't easy. It wasn't a sudden one. It was something that had been building up for months, a slow realization that our love wasn't enough to keep us together. I thought about all the memories we had shared, the good and the bad, and I felt a pang of sadness for what we had lost. But I also knew that I couldn't keep living in the past. I couldn't keep holding on to something that wasn't there anymore, no matter how much I wanted it to work. When I finally told Alex, it was just as painful as I had imagined. There were tears, there were words I couldn't take back, but I knew it was the right thing to do. He seemed surprised at first, almost like he hadn't seen it coming, but deep down, I think he knew too. He just didn't want to face it. We both knew that things weren't right, but neither of us had been brave enough to address it until then. After the breakup, I took time to reflect on everything. It was a relief to not have to carry the weight of an unbalanced relationship anymore, but it was also incredibly painful. I mourned the loss of what we had, the dreams we had built together, and the future I had imagined. But at the same time, I felt like I had reclaimed a part of myself that I had lost along the way. I knew I needed to focus on me now, to rebuild my life and find happiness within myself before I could ever think about being with someone else. I spent the next few months doing the hard work of healing. I reconnected with my passions, took time to be with my friends and family, and allowed myself to enjoy life again. It wasn't easy, but little by little, I felt stronger. I realized that I didn't need to be in a relationship to be complete. I was enough on my own, and I deserved someone who would cherish and appreciate me the way I deserved. It wasn't the end I had hoped for, but it was the beginning of a new chapter, one where I could be true to myself and embrace the future with an open heart. And while there were moments of doubt and sadness, I knew I had made the right choice. Sometimes the hardest decisions are the ones that ultimately set you free. I may have lost Alex, but I had gained something much more important: my independence, my peace of mind, and the strength to move forward. Now, I look ahead with hope. I'm no longer afraid of being on my own because I know I can stand on my own 2 feet. I've learned that the most important relationship I'll ever have is with myself, and with that foundation, I'm ready for whatever the future holds.